You are listening to All of It on WNYC. I'm Alison Stewart. Costume designer Janty Yates won an Academy Award in 2001 for her work on Gladiator. Now she's nominated again for Gladiator II alongside fellow costume designer David Crossman. Janty and Dave split the work for this epic tale of vengeance and scheming in ancient Rome. Janty worked on the costumes for Roman civilians, including Denzel Washington's beautiful robes. And David worked on the military costumes, which meant making many suits of armor. Janty and David are both nominated for Best Costume Design, and we are speaking to them now as part of our Big Picture series. That's when we speak to people who worked behind the camera to make movie magic in 2024. Janty Yates joins me. Hi, Janty.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm doing well. And David Crossman joins us as well. Hi, David.
Hi there. Hello.
Hello. This is the big picture question for you, outside of this one film. Janty, I'll start with you. What do you see as your job on a movie set, the job of the costume designer?
Well, without us, they'd be naked.
And David, to you, what do you think is the job of the costume designer?
Well, it's a similar answer to Janty, really, but I suppose it's to try and fulfill the director's wishes and help them achieve the look of the film, what they're after. Plus the naked part.
Dave, you worked with Napoleon. I'll get back. Dave, you worked on Napoleon with Janty and Ridley Scott. What did you learn from that experience that was useful to you on Gladiator II?
I think Gladiator II, weirdly, was a bit easier than Napoleon, to be honest. It was kind of less complex. So it was... Janty and I, we worked together for a long time, for like 20 years. We've known each other for a long time. And I've done a few Ridley Scott films, so I know roughly how it all kind of works on his films. And I think really for us, it was more of a logistical kind of race against time, really, to get lots of armour ready. I think that's one of the biggest... Whenever you're doing an armour film, it's always about... just time and trying to get everything done in time and into a certain place in time. So it's all of that alongside what you have to do for the actors and things. So,
Janty, you won an Oscar for your work on Gladiator. What was it like to return to this world and these characters all these years later?
Well, it was very exciting. We were told actually while we were doing Napoleon, so it was like, oh, it's really going to happen. So I dove back into research because it was 24 years ago and the brain's not as it was. And had to, as usual, research the hell out of it. But it was very exciting with Connie, for example. She's hardly changed in 24 years. She's still 6 foot. She still has amazing bone structure. She still has got a body to die for. We did go we went a little bit haute couture on her to start with, and we cut a lot of costume and we fitted it, and neither she liked it, nor did Ridley, nor did I. So we went back to the original feel of her look. Denzel was a complete unknown, and he'd asked for a couple of garments to just practice with at home. And I hadn't really realized what he meant by that. But his way of handling his costumes was so much part of his act, not his act, of his persona. He was always just swinging his toga over his shoulder in a nonchalant way and marching off. And I just thought, my God, this man really works at it. The twins, they were just mad. They were like my sons. I loved them to bits. So we just put gold and gold on gold and then some more gold.
Fred Heckinger is a friend of mine since he was a little boy. So that was quite a joy to see him play a crazy emperor.
Crazy, beyond crazy. Ridley's brief for them was Johnny Rotten.
That's a genius. That makes me want to watch it again. Dave, when you're thinking about the costuming in the army, how much of the original Gladiator did you look at initially?
Well, I gave it another look. I mean, I'm well aware of Gladiator. It's been with me for 20 years. People always think that I did it with worked on it with Janty, and I always say no, I didn't do Gladiator. And so no, I was aware of it. I mean, obviously, I wanted to do a bit of my own thing, and then I think the thing that kind of ties most of the first film are the Praetorian Guards. We kind of gave them a kind of 20-year makeover, and we made lots of the Roman army in New Zealand, and then we remade Paul Mescal's mini journey of his kind of new Midian armor going all the way to Maximus's armor, which we remade. We found a set of the original Maximus armor, scanned it, and then made a version for Paul. And so yeah, I'd say the difference was this time we had an Italian leather maker called Gianpaolo Grassi who did a lot of the kind of armor work in house. So it's kind of we blended traditional and modern techniques together, I think, and we had a bit of time to do that. So there were slight differences in the approach, I suppose, in the time, and I suppose we know a bit more than you did, say, 20 years ago about certain things.
Yeah, Janty, on Gladiator, you had both military and civilian costumes. That was your responsibility. And this time you had Dave to help out. What was most valuable to you about that collaboration?
Everything. I adore working with Dave, and I do it for the rest of my life. He takes, for example, all my military, which I did before. He's taken it and enhanced it so brilliantly that it's unrecognizable. Also, I only had 15 gladiators to design, actually, that fought Russell. And he had about 150. And they constantly were making padded shoulders, padded arms, padded knickers, you name it. They were just making so many different varieties so they could dress. You always need 200 if you're dressing 150. It was a huge feat what he did.
I'm speaking with costume designers Janty Yates and Dave Crossman. They are nominated for an Oscar for their work on Gladiator II. You mentioned research is a big part of your job, Janty. How much research? Where did you go to research? How did you start?
Well, I really did exactly what I did in the first Gladiator. Ridley is very painterly and will always be passionate about specific artists for a specific film. And this one for Denzel, he was mad for the Orientalists, for Jerome, for Benjamin Constant. He always adores, there's one particular artist that even the art department, use, for example, the petals in the first one. And his name is Alma Tadema. And we copied a lot. I won't say copied, but we drew a huge amount of inspiration from Alma Tadema. And for example, the tunics were wrapped around with a silk ribbon. I'd call them sausages because they were doubled up. And you drape them around the bosom, around the waist, and around the hip and hanging down to the ground. Mm-hmm. And that was wonderful in a different color until we got to Malta and found that they weren't all 6 foot and dressed they weren't looking like clothes horses, so they looked more like bags of potatoes. Anyway, we managed.
Dave, how about you? Where does your research start?
There's a wealth of material here in England. I was on holiday with the kids in Rome the year before, and we kind of had an inkling that we thought it might happen. So I was dragging them to a few museums and things. So we looking at contemporary things just to see where you can either take license or what's real, what's not, and all that kind of thing. And but there was a lot in the British Museum. There's a place in Cambridge where you can look at copies of sculptures. There's lots of plaster casts of original sculptures that you can look at and photograph, and so all of that. There's so much of it, and then just dating all the Roman helmets so that our period's kind of correct, for what we're doing 20 years on from the original Gladiator, and so it's nice. It's nice research to do. It's a nice subject.
How are you able to make sure the costumes are flexible enough, Dave, for the actors and the stunt doubles to perform these action sequences, and also that they look good?
Well, you always because we made a lot of them in leather, so it's way more comfortable to wear than usually they're made in kind of plastic polyurethane. They're molded, and so after about 2 minutes, everyone's bought it. It's really hot, and the heat in Malta and Morocco was kind of unbearable. So actually, the leather cuirasses kind of saved us a bit with Pedro Pascal and with Paul Mescal, because it's a kind of natural material. So any plastic pieces that we added to it, like Pedro's kind of embossed Medusa head on doesn't affect him in any way. So he's always wearing leather. And then all of the Roman armor is made out of a polyurethane, but it hadn't quite got so hot by then. But it's all made in a kind of flexible. The materials have come on a long way since the first Gladiator, where they were doing a kind of new technique of spraying out hundreds of sets of armor. So we've over the years that's developed, and now the materials are way better. There's more materials, they're softer, they're more flexy, and they look the same. It used to be the case that anything that was soft just looked silly. It looked kind of dull, grey, and you could spot it a mile off. But now it's very hard to tell the difference. You can have
Janty,
spongy.
Yeah, Janty, I want to ask you more about Denzel's costumes, because aside from the robes, the gorgeous robes, he is loaded down with jewelry. He's got him on the rings, he's got earrings, he's got big necklaces. How did you decide to have him wear so much jewelry?
Well, again, looking at the reference that Ridley gave us, they were very, very ornate, the paintings. And so actually we kind of dressed Denzel down. I was astonished that he'd wear the earrings, because I never thought he would. He seemed to want a lot more jewelry than I'd ever anticipated. So it was kind of a joint venture, but not really, because he, in the end, is the one that puts them on in his trailer without any interference. And he'd just appear looking magnificent. I just said, oh, blimey, how wonderful.
I agree with you. Dave, I saw mentioned in an interview that you used vodka to keep the costumes fresh. Is that true?
No, I just drank vodka, and then they seemed fresh. It was like we often it's a way of spraying. You put it into a bottle and you spritz it into the costume. So it's you're more or less just saying alcohol, isn't it? So it just kills the kind of bacteria. So it stops that when you can't wash things, or they get sprayed with a kind of, and it's usually vodka. There's always cheap bottles of vodka on the costume truck waiting to be spritzed into things that can't touch water.
I'm speaking.
But also is that in our civilian wear as well?
We do also use tea tree oil as well, just for anybody who has an alcohol issue. But,
I'm speaking with costume designers Janty Yates and Dave Crossman. They're nominated for Oscars for their work on Gladiator II. When we first meet Lucius, he's a soldier in North Africa. This is the Paul Mescal character. During that time, what would he have worn, and what would his wife have worn? She was a soldier as well.
Yeah, so we tried to do the contrast between the kind of might of the Roman army. They've got the most technically advanced armor. You know, there they are. They're kind of all the money, and then Paul's Numidian armor is just a very kind of cheap, kind of woven leather, hand hewn kind of look, and then his and the most basic kind of under tunic underneath the skirt, and so he's a very, and then a very kind of round, kind of primitive piece of metal on his chest for very basic protection. His wife wears actually a kind of half breastplate, and that's because Ridley wanted to. He kept looking at his wife, how he wanted to dress her, and then he wanted to kind of emulate from the first Gladiator some of the women in the arena on the chariots when they're being killed by Russell, and so we kind of did a version of that cuirass for her, and then she's got a sort of basic helmet, so she's a kind of sharpshooter, kind of archer. So in a way, she's kind of more, elite than Paul is in some ways, and it's but yes, Paul was a kind of primitive look that was based on a Pasolini film. Ridley had seen something. He was quite excited by this pale armor, so it started off very pale. It got slightly darker as we wove it, but it was all kind of woven in house. We made about 9 sets of it, and then he develops on. So he goes into a kind of slave tunic, and then into his kind of gladiator look, which is a kind of a nod to the first film. It's the language of the first film, the gladiator cuirass, and then eventually into the Maximus cuirass after that.
Janty, let's talk about the emperors, the twin emperors. They have this sort of almost white face they wear.
Yeah, and bright orange hair. It was all Ridley, and it was all from Johnny Rotten, because that's not only the characters they were sort of to base themselves on, but he wanted their look to be that in a sort of Roman style.
It's interesting though. They're unstable. They're a little scary in some parts. How did you want to communicate their sort of fearsomeness, their scariness through their costumes?
Well, to be honest, I was leaving that up to them, because I wanted more on more and more layers and more this, so that they would be quite intimidating in their actual appearance or their characters. So, they would be in the brightest colors or the most jewels or the most gold. And just greeting Pedro on the steps, these hysterical emperors in gold on gold cuirasses, which Dave very kindly did for me. It was just, they looked magnificent. I thought they looked hysterically funny.
Dave, General Acacius, played by Pedro Pascal, has this awesome armor, and it's pretty cool. You mentioned it earlier. It's got sort of the head of Medusa is right in the middle. Why Medusa?
Yeah. I think it was a commonly used symbol, and it's a kind of heroic symbol. It had a lot more. We kind of overdid it on the snakes a bit. I think we had a lot more snakes to begin with, and then there was a snake reduction process as we looked at it on the breastplate. But they were definitely exaggerated, just so they kind of extended more. They were kind of crawling all over the chest. That was the idea. So it's meant to invoke fear in his enemies and that kind of feel. But yeah, we did look at it for a long time. That was his main. And then we kind of switched to more traditional. In his white armor, he's got the kind of more classic double griffin kind of mythical creatures on his breastplate.
Is that when he's wearing the white and he comes back?
Yeah,
he looked good in the white. Can I just tell you?
And then the kind of special forces, the special forces version of the snakes later on when he's sneaking into the Colosseum. And then he's got the kind of dark version of the Medusa head snake ensemble.
Johnny, that was really interesting. You said at the beginning of the interview that you wanted to sort of evolve Lucilla's, Connie Nielsen's outfits, but that you said, no, we have to go back to the beginning. Why did the sort of haute couture, why didn't it work?
It was too plain, in actual fact. We were taking Madame Grey. We were doing all sorts of, lovely Yves Saint Laurent early work, lovely single tubes that were sort of like shoulderless and with an inbuilt cloak. And really, Connie wanted more. I looked at her and I thought she looked beautiful, but basically we needed those drapes. We needed a drape from the head, a drape from the hips, a drape from the shoulder, drape, you name it, we draped it. So everybody was happy then.
Dave, there are so many extras, so many soldiers, so many gladiators who need to wear the armor as well. What's the process for dressing so many different people?
Well, could I just say there's nowhere near. We had 3,000 a day on the original Gladiator. They were starting at 2:30 in the morning, and I'd probably join them around 4. Have a lie-in, but then we get rid of them all by 11. So we only had 700 or 800 in the crowd. And Dave, how many did you have with your when your Praetorians met your Romans?
Well, I feel bad now because we haven't got as many as the first Gladiator, but that's because digital technology has moved on, and it would have been too expensive to, dress. We usually on the biggest days we had around 500. We had I think we went up to 200 Praetorian guards, and then on some days we had 500 Roman soldiers. So it depended what we were. But you basically spend a couple of weeks before you start shooting, pre-fitting all these extras. So about 100 people a day come to you and they get fitted in the armor, ready or not, basically. Sometimes you're fitting 50 people with one set of armor because it hasn't arrived yet. And but they're all going through that kind of process. And then they're all given a number. And then on the day of shooting, they come with their number and then they go into the tent and they kind of roll through. So you try and get it as systemized as you can because of time, because you try and not have the kind of 2:00 in the morning situation anymore. You try and more like 5:30 kind of on set for 8:30, that kind of feeling. So you're not killing everybody in the process.
Janty, what is the thing that you are the most proud of in Gladiator II?
Oh God, all of it. All of it. I love every single vision. I love Dave's work, I have to say. I think his Praetorians were just spectacular, and his gladiators, well, all of it. I loved how Denzel looked, but I also loved how Connie looked, and I loved how the Emperors looked. All of it.
What about you, Dave? What are you particularly proud of?
I think I don't know, most parts. I like the boats fighting. I like the emperors. I like Pedro's costumes. I like Paul's costume. I mean, there's nice moments, in the film. Yes, I'm proud of a lot of it. I'm glad I did it. It's one of those nice jobs where you're happy you were involved. And thanks to Janty, basically.
Janty, have you figured out what you're going to wear? I have to ask the costume designer to the Oscars.
I thought I might wear one of Denzel's off-casts as a gesture to him.
I've been speaking with costume designers Janty Yates and Dave Crossman. They are nominated for an Oscar for their work on Gladiator II. It was such a delight to have you here.